capitalists may kill these cute little animals, and our emissions threaten all of Earth.
Devastating worldwide climate change is happening.
But
this is amazing.
Celebrities and politicians have solutions. These cool people own electric and hybrid cars.
The first Prius I ever owned.
Now my mayor wants to ban styrofoam cups.
I think is something we can do without.
Styrofoam too.
So now we gotta look for what's next.
In the name of protecting Earth, we have green tyranny. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Green tyranny is what we call this show, but tyranny is a harsh word, the stuff of dictatorships. Isn't that a little over the top? Most green rules don't seem to rise to that. Also, bans on pollution are actually a good thing. I'm glad government rules made the air and water cleaner. When I was a kid, there was so much soot in the air many places, we didn't open the windows. That's changed for the better. Government dictates clean the water, too, so much so that the rivers around Manhattan are now clean enough to swim in. Even here, within sight of the Empire State Building, within a short distance of millions of people flushing, I'm willing to do this. It was freezing cold, but no longer so filthy. So, hooray for the EPA. So, why do I use the phrase green tyranny? Because government always goes too far. Years ago, when I first learned that some animals were going extinct, I thought the Endangered Species Act was a great idea. But in the hands of government lawyers and environmental zealots, it's become an instrument of petty tyranny. Frogs, prairie dogs, beetles take priority over people. See this guy? He's the Utah prairie dog. You better hope you don't find him on your land. Because if you do, government can make it almost impossible for you to use your land. So say Ed Poitevin and Bruce Hughes. They bought land hoping to develop it, but then the government's environmental tyrants ordered them to stop. Jim Burling from the Pacific Legal Foundation's trying to help them. So what's this about?
This is about the Endangered Species Act going too far. We have, for example, tens of thousands of prairie dogs living in Utah under the protection of the federal government. And as a result, if you own land with prairie dogs on it, you can hardly get rid of them. If you have a cemetery, they could be invading the cemetery like they are in Utah right now, in southern Utah. If you own an airport, the airport is being overrun with prairie dogs, and you can't do much of anything about it. And these prairie dogs, they shouldn't be endangered. They're just like every other prairie dog, so far as we know. The tail is a little different color.
Well, there must be something different. I mean, we have a picture here of the black-tailed prairie dog, which is plentiful, apparently. But the Utah prairie dog, which does look the same to me, is endangered, is threatened, and these experts are not just venal, they want to preserve every species.
They want to preserve everything, including things that don't exist in certain areas. If it could move to the gopher frog, for example.
But don't do that quite yet, because, Bruce, let's hear your story. You have owned land in Utah for a while. You wanted to do what with it?
I bought the piece of land for my retirement to develop as a commercial piece. And when the prairie dogs moved on, what happened was the process of getting them removed, you had to go through a take process, and this take process for my 3.4 acres would have taken 42 years to accomplish.
And we have a statement from the Fish and Wildlife Service saying we work with homeowners. We continue to provide financial and technical assistance to encourage voluntary conservation.
A couple of years ago, they came out with a program that if I paid $34,000 to the government, I could then kill all the prairie dogs on my property. If I didn't pay the $34,000 and I killed one prairie dog, it would be a $10,000 fine and 5 years in federal prison. I could rob my local convenience market and get off easier than that.
A couple people have gone to jail for endangered species violations. But so I'm surprised you didn't pay the $35,000 and kill the prairie dogs.
Well, I didn't have the money.
So, Ed, you live in Louisiana. You have a problem with a different animal.
I do.
I actually have a problem with a non-existent animal. It is called the dusky gopher frog, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has certified that the frog itself has not been seen in the state of Louisiana since 1967.
So it exists elsewhere, it just hasn't been seen in your neck of the woods.
Not only my neck of the woods, in the whole state.
And they want to reestablish it there.
They've said that they want the land that we have, which is over 1,500 acres, to become a frog conservation area. And it will utterly destroy the value of our land, which they will not, and they have told me this, pay for. It's just a massive federal land grab.
You want to build some homes on the land.
We want to build homes and businesses. We are north of Lake Pontchartrain. In Katrina, this land was high and dry and still is. It would be very, very, very valuable for people to live on to avoid the kind of flooding that occurred in Katrina.
So it's illegal for government to just come in and take your land without compensation, but this is sort of a form of that. They're saying it's worth zillions of dollars, but you can't make that money.
That's correct.
The Fish and Wildlife said they were not available to come on the show to talk about this. In response to your complaint, they posted this video on YouTube.
We are looking forward in working with willing landowners in Louisiana. In fact, the service has many voluntary partners-based programs that can provide technical and financial assistance to manage species.
Sounds nice.
It does, but that does not give you the whole picture. Anytime a federal government agency tells you they want to work with you, you better run the other way, because they're not going to pay you. We'd have to burn the land. We have a long-term timber lease on it that we would then breach. We will never be able to develop and sell the land. It won't be good for people to use it.
Fish and Wildlife, the government has a handbook on how to do this, but it's more than 300 pages long.
315 to be exact.
Which is another reason they need a lawyer like you. So sum this up. What's going on?
Fish and Wildlife Service is gone wild. It's a rogue agency that is not even obeying the Endangered Species Act. It's not obeying the National Environmental Policy Act. It's not obeying the U.S. Constitution.
Gone wild and rogue. I mean, I assume these people mean well. They're not evil.
They mean well, but their priorities are all about the species and nothing about the individual landowners who are simply trying to earn a living on their land. This is an agency that has forgotten who they serve. They think they're only serving the animals, but they should be serving the people that live on the land as well. People and the animals can coexist, and they can cooperate to do this. But when you have the heavy hand of the federal government threatening people with jail time, threatening them with huge fines, if you don't do this, then you're going to have all sorts of trouble. It also creates disincentives, because landowners do not want to help the Endangered Species Act if that essentially is going to be an economic death sentence for them.
Hence the phrase shovel,
shoot, shovel, and shut up. That is the trifecta that happens on some lands. It's something that I don't encourage, but as a matter of fact, it does happen. And some people do it legally. Some people are cutting down their trees before they get old enough to be as habitat for red-cockaded woodpeckers. It's not good for the woodpecker. It's not good for the land. It's not good for the economy. It's good for the bureaucrats if you got a 9-to-5 job.
Thank you, Jim and Edward and Bruce. Coming up, in the name of saving the environment, what will my mayor ban next?
I'd like to know what doesn't he want to ban.
And also, fossil fuels. Could they make the world greener? But next, European politicians push green energy. Did you know that they now have second thoughts? That's next. We're constantly told, go green, use less energy, shrink our carbon footprint. In the name of doing that, the U.S. government gives $6 billion in subsidies to the solar industry, $11 billion to wind power companies. Now, if wind or solar were practical today, they wouldn't need billions of your dollars. Entrepreneurs would just invest in them, but investors shy away because they don't want to throw their own money away. The green advocates aren't satisfied with the billions you already give them. They want more. And Europe has been giving them more. This thrills the chattering classes. Thomas Friedman wrote, if only we could be as energy as smart as Denmark. Reuters said Germany sets new solar power record. Government support for renewables help Germany become a world leader in renewable energy. The left-wing think tank, the Center for American Progress, is thrilled that Germany, Spain, China have seized the energy opportunity, but the United States risks getting left behind. Sounds terrible. Europe's cleaning our clock in the new field of renewable energy. But one left-wing European environmentalist, Bjorn Lomborg, says, oops, apparently we in Europe are the ones who've been getting our clocks cleaned. You're Danish. You helped pay for this.
Sure.
What do you mean?
Well, we're certainly paying a very large amount of money to have the bragging rights for Germany having the most solar or Denmark having the most wind. The Germans are spending about $110 billion on subsidies for these solar panels. The net effect of all of those investments will be to postpone global warming by 37 hours by the end of the century.
All those billions for 37 hours delay.
So we'll remember them in 2100 and say, whoa.
You believe in global warming and
global
man-made.
Global warming is real, and it is something we need to fix. But we should fix it smartly and not in a very, very costly way as we're doing right now. Germany is probably spending $660 for every ton of CO2 they're cutting. And remember, the benefit of it is about $5 per ton. That's a bad deal.
And even your foolish politicians in Europe are now saying, I guess we made a mistake and they're cutting back?
They're curbing it, but unfortunately they're not by any means phasing it out. They're still way too proud of their
They're creating green jobs.
And that's another one of those things. You know, when you say we're creating green jobs, well, sure, if you give lots and lots of subsidies, you're inevitably going to get jobs. But where are you going to pay it from? Well, you're going to pay it with higher taxes elsewhere, which, of course, is going to shed jobs.
Each green job costs $175,000 each per job?
Yeah. The bizarre thing is, if you really want jobs, and you can make an argument in a crisis to subsidize jobs in the short run, you can get many, many more jobs if you're focused on infrastructure or hospitals or other things where you would also get a lot of great benefits and more jobs.
Do you dispute this? To use wind power to create the same amount of energy as one nuclear plant, you need windmills that would cover the state of Rhode Island, all of it.
What you have to remember is wind turbines are much, much less efficient, partly because they take up a lot of space.
And they're more efficient than solar.
Yes, they're more efficient, but also simply because they only work about 1/4 of the time. So you need to build a lot of backup power. Now, again, the point here is to say the fuel is free, so potentially we could get to a situation where it would actually be beneficial, but we're not there yet.
But we're spending like we are.
Yes, and that's the real depressing situation. A lot of people are saying global warming is real, so we got to do something now. Well, actually, no. Global warming is real, so we got to find smart ways of making sure we get everybody on board, not just rich, well-meaning Germans and Danes, but that we can also find technologies that will be so cheap that the Chinese and the Indians will buy into these technologies. So this is about, just like everything else, about innovation. If we get cheap green energy, everyone will buy it. As long as it's expensive, we need to subsidize it. Nobody will.
And if it gets practical, I'll invest in it. We don't need the tax money. Thank you, Bjorn. Please stay with us because I keep hearing wonderful things about electric cars. Famous people have them. But you say the green cars have a dirty little secret. That's next.
We can break our dependence on oil with biofuels and become the first country to have 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015.
Even John Boehner applauds. Not very enthusiastically, but he did applaud the president, saying 1 million electric vehicles will help us break our dependence on oil. That's a popular idea. Actor Leonardo DiCaprio's proud he owns one of these, the Fisker Karma, a hybrid electric car that can go 125 miles per hour. Great! DiCaprio can afford the $100,000 it costs. So can Justin Bieber. He has one, too. George Clooney bought this electric car for $100,000, but sold it back to the company. Maybe because it only goes 30 miles before it needs a new charge. Still, electric cars just appeal to people. They give off no emissions. That's why they're a great alternative to oil-burning cars, says Brian Wynn. He's president of the Electric Drive Transportation Association, an electric car lobbying group. Bjorn Lomborg, the skeptical environmentalist, is back because he's skeptical and just wrote a column titled Green Cars Have a Dirty Little Secret. A dirty secret? What?
Well, John, they don't emit any CO2 on the road. But the problem is partly once you produce them, they actually emit a lot of CO2 because a lot of energy goes into the production, especially the battery. So in a sense, half of all the emissions that are coming out of the electric car has already been emitted when you buy it. And the second half, of course, is...
Hang on, it's like 30,000 pounds of carbon dioxide to make the car versus less than half that for an ordinary car.
Exactly. And then the other half is, yes, your zero emissions on the road, but you still need to recharge it. And most of our electricity still comes from fossil fuels. So the real point here is to say, electric cars right now are just not ready to really help us cut carbon emissions in a big way. And it's a very inefficient way of doing it.
So, Brian, he's basically saying that you have pulled off a scam getting all these subsidies for electric cars.
Well, I disagree with his numbers. Clearly, Bjorn is using a study which is not new. It's actually an outlier study. If you challenge basically any of the assumptions in the study, the length of you keep the car, size of the battery pack, the grid mix, etc., it changes the results dramatically. So it's bad numbers in and then bad numbers out.
You're using bad numbers.
Well, listen, it's the latest study that we have. And what it tells us is, sure, if you drive a lot longer, and there are studies out there that are talking about electric cars driving 180,000 miles, and then, yes, you will cut carbon emissions significantly. But let's just be honest, most of these cars, certainly that people can afford, for instance, the Leaf, will drive 73 miles before it needs the recharge. That's not an obvious way to get people to drive a lot.
Brian, MIT Technology Review did write, don't drive your Nissan Leaf too much.
We do have vehicles on the road, early model vehicles, electric vehicles that have actually driven over 200,000 miles before they've given up the ghost, and some of them are still out there. So these are vehicles, the average vehicle, we estimate is in the fleet for 130 miles. They're warranted, all of these vehicles are warranted for 100,000 miles. So, I think we need to be a little bit more realistic about what we're talking about.
Well, let's move to point two then. Let's say it lasts for 200,000 miles. You're plugging it in and you're burning electricity often made from coal. How does that help?
It helps, actually, no matter what you're using to generate your electricity. And let's be clear, we're not using coal, we're using less and less coal, particularly with the price of natural gas falling. And in addition, we're using renewables as well. But no matter what you're using for your mix, plugging your car in is better than using gasoline.
You are?
Well, Brian, if I could just, you're absolutely right, and we agree that if you drive your electric car, you will emit less CO2 than if you drove your diesel or your gasoline car. The real issue here is how much does a car then save in tons of carbon? How much is carbon dioxide cuts from an electric car?
Well, I think the debate was actually on the manufacturing and essentially
what are you saying?
What the established estimates are saying are basically that your manufacturing numbers are probably 2 to 3 times what the actual manufacturing is going to be. The other thing that's interesting about the numbers
you're not answering his question. In total, let's take your manufacturing numbers and then use numbers. If I, to be a good guy and be green, buy an electric car, how much less carbon am I putting out?
You're using only marginally more carbon in the production of the car. Look, the only thing that's different about these cars, they have vastly fewer moving parts. It's basically the batteries that are essentially different. And instead, you're putting a little bit more carbon into that car to produce a battery than you are in using gasoline over the life of a gasoline car.
And over its life, how much less carbon am I going to use if I buy your cars?
Again, we get back into the assumptions game here. And,
okay, make an assumption.
I could pencil. You want me to do math on the program? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying put your best case forward.
I just basically gave you the number, which is my best case forward. The best case forward is that no matter where you plug this car in, it's cleaner from a greenhouse gas point of view, vastly from go, even using gasoline, even using coal to create your electricity.
Bjorn, your point is that even if we generously assume I'm going to burn a lot less carbon, am I going to affect global warming?
Yeah, very, very little. I mean, I'm kind of disturbed with Brian's answer, because you're just not justifying anywhere close to the cost that we're paying, the $7,500 we're paying in subsidies. Okay. And that's the real
Brian, let's touch on that. Why do I have to pay $7,000 every time Leonardo DiCaprio buys an electric car? If your electric cars are good, you pay for them yourself.
We think it's terrific that Leo is driving that car. I'm not a celebrity, and I'm driving one of these cars as well.
Well, I don't want to pay for your car.
I didn't ask you to. Basically, but the federal government essentially is very mindful. The president, some of our biggest our supporters, by the way, are Republicans, because they understand that more than $1 billion a day is flowing out of this country to support our addiction to oil.
Yeah, politicians are crony capitalists too, so but why should I spend $7,000 subsidizing you?
The reason why it's worth basically investing federal dollars in this is because we want to lead the world in this technology. And there's no question, and I don't think Bjorn is disputing the fact that electric drive is the drivetrain of the future. It's vastly more efficient than a combustion engine. It's better for the environment. It's better for energy security, and it's better for our competitive position in the world. So why not lead?
He says you agree this is the technology of the future, yes or no?
We should invest in getting those technologies much better, but right now, they're just very expensive.
Thank you, Bjorn. Coming up, my mayor here in New York wants to ban this. It's too big, he says. That got publicity. But now, Mayor Bloomberg has a new enemy. What's that? I'll tell you next. Oh, shouldn't have let you see this. My mayor says foam cups like this are environmentally destructive. And outside the studio, people agree.
The styrofoam is absolutely horrible for the environment.
Yeah, I think styrofoam should be decreased throughout the world. I think it would just help the environment a lot if we could just use paper.
Paper? Yeah, what's wrong with that? Many things, says Angela Logomassina from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. What? Why? There's a cost to sending this out to garbage disposals and...
Well, John, if you're worried about the environment, those cups are better than the paper cups. They're more energy efficient.
My Mayor Bloomberg is just dumb?
I don't know what his issue is, but he's incorrect about the energy profile in those cups.
But what do you mean more energy efficient?
Well, to make them and to use them and to dispose of them, they're 30 times more energy efficient than a paper cup.
But the mayor says he's got to ship it to a landfill somewhere, and that costs the city millions of dollars. He's going to save us money.
Well, where are they shipping the paper cups? They're shipping those to the landfill, too.
This doesn't get recycled easily.
Neither. I don't think the paper cups do either. There's no easy answer. But even if
people don't like these.
So what? I like them. They don't burn my hands. They are more energy efficient, and you know what? They're less expensive, which is good for New York City businesses. This is going to be a huge cost to businesses, including the government agencies, which are going to spend $11 million more, according to one study, to buy paper instead of the foam cups.
Well, people are at least starting to wake up to some of the excesses of the nanny state. Most people we interviewed were skeptical about Bloomberg's proposed ban.
I think that he should really let people do what they want.
I think he should just take his nose out of everybody's business.
These are successful for a reason.
Absolutely. People are buying them because they're cheaper. And they're cheaper because they use less energy. And they're also lighter. So if you're putting them in the landfill, they're going to be a lot easier to transport. Just like the paper cups that are going to landfill, these are just going to be that much less energy usage to get them there.
And there's a myth about landfills, too, that we're drowning in garbage, running out of space.
Yes. We could fit an awful lot of trash in one small, relatively small landfill. 1,000 years worth, according to researchers, and there'd be no problem, no consequences. There are not a lot of environmental issues. They're very sanitary.
All America's garbage, I read, could fit in one pile. It would fit on 10
miles by
ranch.
44 miles, yeah. And it's not really a big thing when you look at it in perspective.
And some towns compete to get garbage to make money on landfills. They build golf courses on top of them.
In where I am, I'm originally from New York, but my garbage, when I was in New York, was going to my home state now, which is Virginia. And it's been used to build schools, to help a lot of rural communities that had nothing. It's been a boon, an economic boon. but people don't like the way it sounds, even though they didn't even know the landfill was there when I went to go find it. I had to ask for directions. Nobody knew it was there.
One street vendor told us it would cost him so much more if he couldn't use foam.
I would say in a week, maybe $100 more. Styrofoam is best for what I do because it keeps the food warmer at a warmer temperature, so by the time you're ready to eat it, you can still enjoy the meal. And for example, when I have 25 customers on a line here, I don't want to be taking my time. He could dish out the food fast, close it, we put it in a bag, and it goes. It's way cheaper.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Enjoy.
Thank you. He may have to switch to these aluminum containers, which are not as
That's
good.
definitely going to take a lot more energy.
And these are hot to hold.
Absolutely.
One person we asked about foam made an interesting point about another form of green tyranny.
I'm actually all for San Francisco's ban on plastic bags.
A ban on plastic bags. And San Francisco is not alone. Seattle, a bunch of other places have done this. Austin, Texas. What's wrong with that?
Well, you know, we don't think about the unintended consequences sometimes. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania did a study, and they noticed that the hospital admissions for bacterial-related illnesses went up 25% after the ban.
In San Francisco, more people got sick from food poisoning because people use reusable bags, and
these bags harbor disease, so it's very plausible that people may have died because of a silly ban.
And another unintended consequence, in Seattle, store owners are complaining about an increase in shoplifting as people come in.
I mean, and that's
with
crazy.
These bags. Always, they mean well. I think Bloomberg means well, but there are unintended consequences, and these politicians are arrogant, and we should have limited government. Thank you, Angela, for working for the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which understands that. Up next, climate change.
This is a huge, huge planetary crisis. We've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel.
It is overwhelming, the science. Overwhelming. It's not even a question.
It's not even a question? Well, then, I'm ready. I've got my raft here. But am I just falling for more green tyranny? When we return.
We've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, cut greenhouse gas emissions, move to energy efficiency, move to sustainable energy.
It is overwhelming, the science. Overwhelming. It's not even a question.
The science is overwhelming, says Beckel. But overwhelming about what exactly? Certainly, I agree with Beckel. He says it's overwhelming that the Earth is warming. Most scientists agree about that. That's why we have this raft in my office. But, you know, just in case. But Beckel also believes that man is the cause of the warming. Is the science settled about that? Climate changes. Always has, always will. It changed before man. Is man causing it now? Is global warming a crisis? And can we do anything about it? Those are the big questions. So let's have a debate about that. Roy Spencer is a climatologist at the University of Alabama. He's skeptical about man causing global warming. To debate him, we have, well, actually, we have an empty chair. We asked a dozen scientists who are concerned about man causing global warming to debate Roy. Most refused. The Union of Concerned Scientists says that debating you, Roy, would be doing the public a disservice because it would give your extreme ideas credibility. So what do you say to that? It's how you're portrayed as this wacky extremist.
Well, as you've already mentioned, John, I don't deny that there's been warming. In fact, I don't even deny that some of the warming is due to mankind. What I deny is that we have any clue how much of the warming, whether it's 10% or 90%. I don't think we have a clue.
All right, so before we hear from you, I want to hear from both sides on this issue. So we did find a scientist who was alarmed about man causing global warming, who was willing to talk about this as long as it was not a debate. So, Roy, get lost. Go away if you would take a seat over there, and let's welcome NASA scientist Gavin Schmidt. Dr. Schmidt, come on in. You work for the Goddard...
I work for the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is a NASA offshoot in New York City.
All right, so why is Roy Spencer wrong in saying we're not sure about man causing it?
So you made a good point earlier on. You said that climate changes all the time. It has, and it has done for many, many different reasons. It's changed because we've had big volcanoes. It's changed because the sun has changed. It's changed because there have been orbital wobbles in the Earth's path around the sun that has caused like ice ages to come and go. All of those things are totally true. So we've looked at the sun. It's not the sun. We've looked at volcanoes. It's not volcanoes. We've looked at the orbit. It's not the orbit.
This time, it's not those things.
But what we've been doing the last 150 years is we've been increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over 40% in terms of carbon dioxide. We've more than doubled the amount of methane, which is another greenhouse gas. And the signatures of those changes are very, very clear all the way through the system.
Assuming this is true, why is it necessarily a problem? Warmer might be better. More people die from cold than warmth.
We have built a society and an agricultural system and cities and everything that we do based on assumptions that basically the climate is not going to change. The fact that we have so much infrastructure right near the shore is because we didn't expect the sea level to rise. The damage that we had from Hurricane Sandy was increased because sea level has increased by 10 to 12 inches in this area.
President Obama says wildfires are increasing, hurricanes are increasing, drought. Is this true? I thought these things have always happened, and this is alarmism. You agree with that?
So there are some things that we can look at and we can say, okay, they're changing. Heat waves. We're having more extreme heat waves over a wider area.
Hurricanes, you mentioned Sandy.
Okay, hurricanes, there's more uncertainty in the science of hurricanes.
Are they increasing?
It's a tricky thing, hurricanes.
I mean, they have this graph of hurricanes by decade, and they don't show an increase.
Right. So I didn't say they did. But we're seeing more intense rainfall. That's very clear over the whole of the U.S., over Europe, and in other places as well. And now, what's going on in the future? That's where we're concerned about. Because
what can we do? What What can we do about it? We like burning fossil fuels.
No, you know what? You like the product of burning fossil fuels. Like you mentioned before, earlier on, about how dirty the air was when there was unrestricted burning of coal. Right? We don't like actually burning coal. What we like is the energy that comes from coal. Right? What we like is energy.
Yeah, and we like energy, and even if we cut our emissions in half, it wouldn't affect the world.
Oh, it would. If we cut our emissions by half,
it would be a tenth of the world's CO2. And we're not going to cut it in half.
Well, eventually we will, because eventually this is going to be a problem that is so large that we will transition to a more renewable.
But China isn't cutting, India isn't cutting.
That's a big problem, and they're not going to take a lead on this because we haven't taken a lead.
But why should we make poor people suffer?
I don't say you shouldn't make poor people suffer.
If you make fuel cost more, that hurts poor people.
Then you give it back as a rebate, and you make people understand that what we need to do is move off carbon sources of fuel.
I'm not qualified to debate you climatologists. Why won't you debate Roy Spencer? He's not a flake. He helped produce the data that the government uses for the atmospheric temperatures.
I'm not a politician. I'm here because you asked me to come on and talk about the science, and I am totally happy to do that. And anytime you want to ask me again, just give me a call and I will come here and I will tell you about the science and I will point you in the right direction. But I'm not interested in doing this because it's good TV. I'm interested because what we have discovered as a scientific community needs to be talked about. And you need to talk about it, and Roy needs to talk about it, and all these people need to talk about it. But I don't need to be arguing with people just to make good TV.
Thank you, Gavin Schmidt. I appreciate you coming in. I would love to have you back. And if you would give the chair up again, let's bring Roy Spencer in to reply to what you said. Or stay if you like.
I'm not interested. But thank you very much.
Dr. Spencer, can you? So, what do you say to what he says?
Well, Gavin said quite a bit. I agree with some of what he says. I speak out because I believe that forcing unrealistic, expensive energy solutions upon the poor is going to kill people. We know that poverty kills. That's not theoretical. It happens today. I would rather save people today from poverty than theoretically save people in the future.
You've also said that carbon dioxide can make the planet greener?
Well, that's pretty well understood. There's hundreds of papers that have been published by plant physiologists that show that increasing CO2 is good for basically all the plants that they study, even crops like corn. My long-term prediction is that eventually we're going to realize that more CO2 in the atmosphere is actually a good thing. And considering the fact that it is necessary for life on Earth to have CO2 in the atmosphere, it's amazing how little there is in the atmosphere.
The perception among my friends here in New York is that you're this weird outlier, and all the other serious scientists say, man's doing it, we've got to fix it now.
Well, I hate to say it, but that's, a characterization that's come about because of the media. I mean, people like Al Gore portray people like me as fringe, and when in fact
he won't debate anybody either.
Well, no, of course not. I consider my views pretty mainstream, and I know there's a lot of
climatology. You find a lot of people. Who
I
agree
find
with
a
you.
lot of people that agree with me, but will not speak out because they're afraid that they might lose their funding. All you hear from on the other side from me are scientists who have decided to take a stand publicly, get involved with the politicians, and
if you say this is a big problem, that's when you get money to fix the problem.
Yeah, Congress doesn't give money out for things that are not problems.
Thank you, Dr. Roy Spencer. Coming up, the side of the argument you rarely hear, how those horrible fossil fuels, gas, oil, even coal, make our planet better. So says the next guest. Watching TV news and reading the papers, you'd assume the most horrible, hateful thing going on in America is our burning fossil fuels. I'm told we're destroying the earth, burning gas, oil, and coal, and we burn more than other countries. The National Audubon Society says there is no greater threat to our environment. But my next guest, scientific journalist Matt Ridley, says the opposite is true. Matt, how can that be the case?
Well, if you think about it, when we're burning fossil fuels, it means we're not burning something else. We're not cutting down forests and so on. And the more we burn fossil fuels, the more we can produce fertilizer. And that means we use less land to grow our food, so we can spare land for forests. So there's actually net forest increase in a lot of the world, particularly America. But over and above that, there's a fascinating new discovery, which is that the world as a whole is getting greener. Places like the Amazon rainforest are actually getting greener, and the reason is partly because we're putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that makes plants grow faster.
All right, so let's break that down. In general, there is less farmland and more land returned to forest because we burn oil, coal instead of trees.
New England used to be 70% farmland. It's now 70% forest. Countries like Bangladesh are growing more forest. There's a new satellite which measures the greening of the Earth, and it's finding that about 20% of the Earth is getting greener and 3% is getting browner, and about half of that effect is coming from the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the air from burning fossil fuels. So literally, the burning of fossil fuels is helping the rainforest in the Amazon to grow. Now, that's a very unwelcome message for the environmental movement. It just happens to be true. There's a very nice example of this, which is the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is pretty green. Haiti is very brown. Haiti is almost totally deforested. The reason is because they use charcoal.
You can even see a clear line between the two countries just looking from the satellites.
Yeah,
one's green,
you
one's
can see
brown.
it on a satellite. You can see it in an aerial photograph. And the reason is because Haiti relies on wood for not only domestic fuel but for industrial fuel too, whereas the Dominican Republic uses fossil fuels, and it actually subsidizes the use of propane as a cooking fuel so that people won't go out into the forest and cut down trees to make charcoal to cook over. So there's a very clear example of how the use of fossil fuels is actually good for the environment.
And the propane comes from the natural gas, which we're discovering much more of. Of course, it would be better in terms of global warming, if it really is a threat, if we could burn less oil and use more wind power or solar power, perhaps. But it's such a joke when you look at our current energy use. We have a graph of that. I don't think people know that 3/4 of our energy comes from those horrible fossil fuels. Nuclear's 10%. Wind and solar are a tiny fraction. I left out hydropower, which is one of the best. But we're nowhere close to getting rid of fossil fuels.
That's right. And I mean, wind is just an irrelevance in this argument. People go on and on about how it saves the planet. Actually, it needs a huge amount of landscape. Even if we carpeted the whole of Australia with wind turbines, we still wouldn't be able to make much of a difference. So a lot of these renewables are really not making a dent in the problem.
The public doesn't buy this at all. How come?
Well, we've spent so long demonizing fossil fuels over the last few decades that no wonder people think that they're the root of all evil. But, you know, when you think about it, it's not even just the environment. Things like slavery, you know, because we made energy cheap, it became possible to get rid of slavery. You know, so that the humanitarian effects of cheap energy are very important.
Slow down. How did cheap energy help end slavery?
Because you use machines instead of people, basically. You know, once energy is cheap, you invent more machinery, you have factories running, and they're saying, look, hang on, this is cheaper than hiring lots of people. You know, so it does actually, on the whole, it undermines also getting cheap energy. You either have cheap labor or you have cheap energy, and basically it's nicer for people if we have cheap energy.
Thank you, Matt Ridley, for that unconventional wisdom. And that's our show. Thank you for watching. See you next week.